The message arrived at exactly 9:14 a.m. on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing biotech samples in my lab at Meridian Research. The notification chimed on my phone, and I glanced at it expecting another reminder about picking up groceries or scheduling dinner reservations. Instead, I found 17 words that would dismantle my entire existence. Plans have changed. I'm going to Paris with my ex. He's a better biological option to get pregnant than you. I read it 3 times before the meaning penetrated my skull. Zoya Sornel, my wife of 4 years, had just informed me via text message that she was abandoning our marriage for her French ex-boyfriend, Dr. Alain Morel, because he possessed superior genetic material for reproduction purposes. The clinical detachment of her phrasing struck me immediately. Better biological option, as if she were selecting laboratory equipment rather than destroying a human relationship. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of her complaining that I spent too much time thinking like a scientist, she had reduced our marriage to a simple cost-benefit analysis. My hands remained steady as I forwarded the message to my work email account. Years of handling delicate laboratory instruments had trained me to maintain physical control even when my mind was reeling. I saved the message with a timestamp and screenshot, then began methodically documenting everything that would follow. The first call came from our joint credit card company. I explained that I needed to freeze the account immediately due to unauthorized usage concerns. The representative was professionally sympathetic as she walked me through the process. Within minutes, Zoya's access to our shared finances was terminated. Next, I contacted our property management company and requested a copy of our lease agreement. The document arrived in my email within an hour, complete with the power of sale authorization that Zoya had signed the previous year during our refinancing process. At the time, she had barely glanced at the paperwork, trusting me to handle the financial details while she focused on her art gallery career. That signature would prove to be her downfall. By noon, I had filed the power of sale form with the appropriate authorities. The legal mechanism was designed for emergency situations where one spouse needed to liquidate assets quickly. Zoya's text message provided perfect justification. She had abandoned the marital home to pursue another relationship, leaving me responsible for all financial obligations. The apartment we shared overlooked the harbor district of Portland, Maine. We had purchased it 2 years ago when both our careers were ascending. Zoya's contemporary art gallery was gaining recognition among local collectors, while my position at Meridian Research provided steady income and excellent benefits. The space reflected our combined aesthetic sensibilities, her eye for visual composition balanced against my preference for functional efficiency. Now it felt like a mausoleum of false promises. I spent my lunch break researching real estate agents who specialized in rapid sales. The market in Portland was competitive, especially for waterfront properties. Our apartment featured floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, and a kitchen that Zoya had insisted on renovating with imported Italian fixtures. The improvements would work in my favor. By 3 o'clock, I had scheduled appointments with 2 different realtors for that evening. The first was a sharp-tongued woman named Patricia Kellerman, who promised to have the property listed within 24 hours. The second was a younger man who specialized in cash transactions with investors. I decided to meet with both and choose whoever could guarantee the fastest closing. The afternoon dragged as I attempted to focus on my laboratory work. Meridian Research was developing new fertility treatments, which added a layer of cosmic irony to my situation. I spent my days helping other couples achieve pregnancy, while my own wife sought genetic material elsewhere. My colleague Jennifer Martinez noticed my distraction during our 4 o'clock team meeting. "You seem preoccupied today, Wilder. Everything all right at home?" "Just some personal matters to resolve," I replied. "Nothing that will affect my work performance." Jennifer nodded but continued studying my expression with concern. We had worked together for 3 years, and she possessed an uncanny ability to detect when something was troubling her colleagues. I made a mental note to maintain better emotional control around the office. The first realtor meeting took place at 6:30. Patricia Kellerman arrived precisely on time, dressed in a navy business suit and carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She spent 15 minutes examining the apartment, taking photographs and making notes on a tablet. "This will sell quickly," she announced. "Waterfront properties in this neighborhood are in high demand. I can have it listed tonight and schedule showings for tomorrow morning. What's your target timeline?" "As fast as legally possible," I told her. "Money is not the primary concern." Patricia raised an eyebrow but didn't ask for details. Professional realtors learned not to probe too deeply into their clients' motivations. "I can arrange a cash sale with one of my investor contacts. They specialize in rapid acquisitions for development projects. You could close within a week if you're flexible on price." "How flexible?" 15% below market value, but you'd avoid the uncertainty of traditional financing and inspection delays. I calculated quickly. Even with the reduced price, the sale would generate enough cash to fund my next phase of planning. "Make the arrangements." The second realtor arrived as Patricia was leaving. David Chen was younger and less polished, but he confirmed Patricia's assessment of the market conditions. He also mentioned knowing several developers who were actively seeking properties in our building for conversion projects. "Your timing is perfect," David explained. "There's a group from Boston looking to purchase multiple units for a boutique hotel development. They're prepared to pay cash and close quickly to secure the entire floor." I chose to work with Patricia based on her professional demeanor and established investor connections. We signed a listing agreement that evening, and she promised to have cash offers by the following afternoon. As I signed the paperwork, my phone buzzed with another message from Zoya. This one was longer and more emotional than her initial announcement. "Wilder, I know this is sudden, but I need you to understand that this isn't about not loving you. Alain and I have a history, and when he offered to help me start a family, I couldn't ignore the opportunity. We're not getting any younger, and my biological clock is ticking. I hope you can support my decision, and we can work out the details when I return. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Please don't do anything rash while I'm gone." The audacity of her message was breathtaking. She had abandoned our marriage via text message, fled the country with another man, and now expected me to patiently await her return so we could work out the details of her betrayal. The assumption that I would remain passive while she pursued pregnancy with her ex-boyfriend revealed how completely she had underestimated my character. I deleted the message without responding. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Patricia called at 8 a.m. to report that her investor contact was prepared to make an immediate cash offer. The price was exactly what she had predicted, 15% below market value, but with a guaranteed closing within 72 hours. I accepted without hesitation. While Patricia handled the legal paperwork, I began the process of redirecting my financial assets. My payroll department was accommodating when I explained that I needed to change my direct deposit information due to banking complications. The new account was established at a different institution, one that Zoya had never used. The health insurance modifications required more delicate handling. I contacted our benefits administrator and explained that my wife was traveling internationally and would need to be removed from our family coverage temporarily. The representative was helpful and processed the change immediately, terminating Zoya's access to medical benefits. These actions felt coldly satisfying. Each phone call and form submission represented another thread being severed from the web of our shared existence. Zoya had chosen to abandon our partnership, so I was simply formalizing the dissolution with methodical precision. The ultrasound machine proved to be a more emotionally complex task. Zoya had purchased the device 6 months ago when we first began discussing starting a family. She claimed it would help her track her ovulation cycles and optimize our chances of conception. The machine had cost nearly $3,000 and represented her commitment to our future together. Or so I had believed at the time. Now I understood that the device was probably intended for use with Alain from the beginning. The timeline of her purchase coincided with when she had begun receiving mysterious phone calls and spending additional time at the gallery during evening hours. I had attributed her behavior to work stress, but the pattern suddenly made perfect sense. I carefully packaged the ultrasound machine in its original box and arranged for shipment to a storage facility across town. The unit was registered under my name and paid for with my credit card, making it legally my property. Zoya could retrieve it eventually, but only after acknowledging my ownership and paying the associated storage fees. The psychological impact of removing the device from our bedroom was profound. For months, it had served as a daily reminder of our shared reproductive goals. Now, its absence created a void that felt both liberating and melancholy. My phone remained mercifully quiet for the rest of the day. Zoya was presumably too busy enjoying Paris with Alain to maintain regular communication with her abandoned husband. I used the silence to focus on my laboratory work and finalize the remaining details of the apartment sale. Thursday morning brought the first sign of external interference. Zoya's sister Jules called my office at 10:15, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. "Wilder, I just spoke with Zoya. She told me about the situation, and I think you both need to slow down and consider the consequences of your actions." Jules had always appointed herself as the family mediator, inserting herself into conflicts that didn't concern her. She was 2 years older than Zoya and had never married, which she claimed gave her objective perspective on relationship dynamics. In reality, her advice was usually biased toward whatever position would create the most drama. "What consequences are those, Jules?" I asked, keeping my voice professionally neutral. "She's coming back pregnant, Wilder. This isn't just about your marriage anymore. There's going to be a child involved, and you need to think about what's best for everyone." The assumption that Zoya's pregnancy was already confirmed struck me as premature. She had been gone for less than a week, which meant any positive test results would be based on previous encounters with Alain. The timeline suggested their affair had been ongoing for much longer than her text message had implied. "I appreciate your concern, Jules, but this situation is between Zoya and me. I would suggest staying out of it. You can't just abandon her when she needs support the most. Whatever problems you two are having, they can be worked out through counseling or mediation. Don't let your pride destroy your family." The irony of her statement was staggering. Zoya had literally abandoned our marriage to pursue pregnancy with another man, yet Jules was lecturing me about family loyalty and pride. The selective application of moral standards was typical of Zoya's relatives, who had always treated me as an outsider despite 4 years of marriage. "I'll take that under advisement," I replied, then hung up before she could continue her lecture. The call confirmed that Zoya was maintaining contact with her family, while avoiding direct communication with me. She was probably crafting a narrative that portrayed her actions as justified, while painting me as the unreasonable party. The strategy was predictable, but ultimately futile, since her own text message provided irrefutable evidence of her intentions. Patricia called that afternoon with an update on the closing timeline. The buyer's attorney had reviewed all the documentation and confirmed that the power of sale authorization was legally valid. The transaction could proceed as scheduled, with final signatures required Friday morning. "There is one potential complication," Patricia warned. "If your wife returns and objects to the sale, she could file an injunction to halt the closing. Do you anticipate any interference from her?" "She's currently in Paris and won't return for another week," I assured her. "The sale will be completed before she's aware of it." "Good. My client prefers to avoid legal complications. They're planning to begin renovation work immediately after closing." The finality of that statement was deeply satisfying. Within 24 hours, our apartment would belong to developers who intended to gut the interior and convert it into commercial space. Even if Zoya somehow managed to reverse the sale through legal action, she would return to find her carefully curated living space destroyed beyond recognition. Friday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather for early October in Maine. I met Patricia and the buyer's representatives at the attorney's office at 9 a.m. sharp. The paperwork was extensive but straightforward: deed transfers, financial disclosures, and liability waivers that formally severed my connection to the property. The buyer turned out to be a development company from Boston that specialized in boutique hotel conversions. Their representative explained that they planned to combine our unit with the adjacent apartment to create a luxury suite with harbor views. The renovation would begin the following Monday. I signed each document with methodical care, ensuring that every detail was legally binding and irreversible. The final signature transferred ownership and deposited the full purchase price into my new bank account. Within minutes, I had converted 4 years of shared domestic life into liquid assets that Zoya could never access or claim. The attorney handed me a certified copy of the sale documents and congratulated me on the smooth transaction. I thanked him and walked out of his office as a newly single man with complete financial independence. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. Another message from Zoya, this one sent from what appeared to be a Parisian cafe based on the background visible in her attached photo. Having the most amazing time here with Alain. The city is so romantic, and he's been showing me all his favorite places. I feel like I'm finally living the life I was meant to have. I hope you're taking care of everything at home. Can't wait to share all the details when I get back. Love you. The casual tone of her message was remarkable. She was documenting her affair with photographic evidence while expressing affection for the husband she had abandoned. The psychological disconnect suggested either complete narcissism or genuine delusion about the consequences of her actions. I deleted the message and drove home to begin the next phase of my planning. The apartment felt different when I returned that Friday afternoon, though nothing had physically changed yet. Knowing that the space no longer belonged to me created a strange sense of detachment, as if I were visiting a museum exhibit of my former life. Every piece of furniture, every decorative object, every photograph on the wall represented a shared decision that had now become meaningless. I began the process of separating my belongings from Zoya's with the same methodical approach I used in laboratory research. Personal items were sorted into 3 categories: essential items that I would take immediately, valuable items that required secure storage, and everything else that could be abandoned without consequence. My clothing, important documents, and professional equipment filled 2 large suitcases and a laptop bag. The valuable items, mostly electronics, books, and a few family heirlooms, went into storage boxes that I would ship to a facility across town. Everything else could remain for Zoya to deal with when she discovered her changed circumstances. The process of dismantling our shared domestic space was surprisingly therapeutic. Each item I packed represented another connection being severed, another step toward complete independence. Zoya had chosen to rebuild her life with Alain, so I was simply facilitating her transition by removing myself from the equation entirely. My laptop contained the most important element of the next phase: comprehensive documentation of everything that had occurred since receiving her initial text message. Screenshots of her messages, copies of all legal and financial paperwork, and a detailed timeline of my actions created an unassailable record of events. If Zoya attempted to challenge my decisions through legal channels, she would discover that I had anticipated every possible objection. The locksmith arrived at 4 o'clock as scheduled. I had contacted him that morning and explained that I needed the apartment locks changed due to security concerns. He was efficient and professional, installing new deadbolts on both the front door and the interior office where I had kept important documents. "You want me to leave the old keys?" he asked as he finished the installation. "No, dispose of them. Only I should have access now." He nodded and handed me 3 copies of the new keys. I kept one and locked the others in my car's glove compartment for safekeeping. With the apartment secured, I began relocating the most valuable items to temporary storage. The process required several trips, but by evening, I had removed everything that mattered to me personally or professionally. What remained was primarily furniture and decorative items that reflected Zoya's aesthetic preferences rather than mine. The final step was arranging for utility transfers. I contacted the electric, gas, and internet providers and explained that I would no longer be responsible for service at that address. The representatives were accommodating, and most services would be discontinued within 48 hours unless someone else assumed responsibility. Zoya would return to find herself locked out of an apartment with no electricity, no heat, and no internet access. The psychological impact would be devastating, but it was simply the logical consequence of her decision to abandon our shared life. I spent that evening in a downtown hotel, reviewing my documentation and planning the next phase of operations. Zoya's return was still a week away, which provided time to establish my new living situation and prepare for whatever legal challenges she might attempt. The hotel room was comfortable but impersonal, which suited my current emotional state perfectly. I had no desire for familiar surroundings or sentimental reminders of my previous life. The sterile environment allowed me to focus on practical considerations without emotional distractions. Saturday morning brought another message from Zoya, this one accompanied by multiple photos of her and Alain touring various Parisian landmarks. They appeared relaxed and happy, completely absorbed in their romantic adventure, while remaining oblivious to the systematic destruction of her domestic security. Alain took me to the most incredible restaurant last night. The food was amazing, and the wine was even better. He knows so much about French culture and history. I'm learning so much from him. This trip is exactly what I needed to gain perspective on my life and my future. Hope you're doing well back home. The casual tone of her updates continued to amaze me. She was documenting her affair with photographic evidence while maintaining the pretense that this was simply a vacation that would have no lasting consequences. The cognitive dissonance suggested that she genuinely believed I would accept her behavior and welcome her back without objection. I forwarded her message to my documentation file and continued with my morning routine. The weekend passed quietly as I established my temporary living arrangements and researched long-term housing options. Portland's rental market offered several furnished apartments that would meet my immediate needs while I decided on a permanent relocation strategy. Monday brought the first sign that my actions were having their intended effect. Jules called my office again, this time with barely controlled panic in her voice. Wilder, I've been trying to reach Zoya all weekend, but her phone keeps going to voicemail. I'm worried that something might have happened to her in Paris. Have you heard from her recently? The concern in Jules' voice was genuine, but her assumption that I would be monitoring Zoya's communications revealed how completely she misunderstood the current situation. I haven't spoken with her since she left, I replied truthfully. Perhaps she's simply too busy enjoying her vacation to maintain regular contact. This isn't like her. She always checks in with family when she's traveling. I think something might be wrong. I'm sure she's fine, Jules. She's probably just distracted by her new relationship. There was a long pause before Jules responded. What do you mean by new relationship? The question revealed that Zoya had not been completely honest with her family about the nature of her Paris trip. She had probably described it as a business opportunity or personal vacation rather than acknowledging her affair with Alain. You should ask Zoya about that when you speak with her, I suggested, then ended the call. The conversation confirmed that Zoya was maintaining different narratives for different audiences. Her family believed she was on a legitimate trip, while her messages to me documented her romantic involvement with Alain. The contradictory stories would eventually create problems for her, but that was no longer my concern. Tuesday brought news that the apartment renovation had begun as scheduled. Patricia called to inform me that the new owners had started demolition work and would be combining my former unit with the adjacent space. The process would take approximately 6 weeks and would result in a completely transformed layout. They're planning to install a private elevator and expand the harbor view windows, Patricia explained. It's going to be a beautiful luxury suite when they finish. The description was satisfying in a way that surprised me. Zoya had spent countless hours arranging and rearranging the apartment's decor, obsessing over color schemes and furniture placement. Now, her carefully curated living space was being demolished with sledgehammers and power tools. "I'm glad the sale worked out for everyone involved," I told Patricia. "It was one of the smoothest transactions I've handled this year. Your preparation made all the difference." Wednesday marked exactly 1 week since receiving Zoya's initial text message. In 7 days, I had dissolved our shared financial accounts, sold our apartment, changed the locks, discontinued utilities, and relocated all my personal belongings. The speed and efficiency of the operation would have been impossible without her own written confession of abandoning our marriage. My phone remained quiet throughout the day, suggesting that Zoya was still absorbed in her Parisian adventure. The silence was welcome, as it allowed me to focus on my laboratory work without emotional distractions. Thursday brought an unexpected development. Jennifer Martinez approached me during our lunch break with an expression of professional concern. "Wilder, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've noticed that you seem different lately. More focused, but also more distant. Is everything all right with your personal life?" Jennifer was perceptive and genuinely caring, which made her question difficult to deflect. We had worked closely together for 3 years, and she had met Zoya several times at company social events. "I'm going through some personal transitions," I admitted. "Nothing that will affect my work performance, but significant changes in my domestic situation. If you need someone to talk to, or if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. We're colleagues, but I also consider you a friend." Her offer was sincere and appreciated, but I had no desire to discuss the details of my situation with anyone. The fewer people who knew about my actions, the better. "Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate the support." She nodded but continued studying my expression with concern. "Just remember that isolation isn't always the best way to handle major life changes. Sometimes talking through problems can provide perspective." I assured her that I would keep her advice in mind, then redirected our conversation to work-related topics. Friday afternoon brought the call I had been expecting. Jules contacted my office with barely controlled hysteria in her voice. "Wilder, something terrible has happened. Zoya tried to return to the apartment this morning, but her keys don't work and the utilities have been shut off. She's been calling and texting you for hours, but you're not responding. What the heck is going on?" The moment of truth had finally arrived. Zoya had returned from her romantic adventure to discover the consequences of her actions. The shock and confusion must have been overwhelming as she stood in the hallway of her former building, unable to access the life she had abandoned. I received a text message from Zoya last week, informing me that she was leaving our marriage to pursue pregnancy with her ex-boyfriend. I explained calmly. I took appropriate action to protect my financial and legal interests. "You can't just lock her out of her own home. She has legal rights as your wife. The apartment was sold 6 days ago to a development company. It no longer belongs to either of us." The silence that followed was profound. Jules was clearly struggling to process the implications of what I had told her. "You sold the apartment without telling her?" I used the power of sale authorization that she signed last year. The transaction was completely legal and properly documented. "But where is she supposed to live? All her belongings are in there." "That's no longer my responsibility, Jules. Zoya made her choice when she abandoned our marriage. I simply formalized the dissolution." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Jules alternating between threats and pleas. She demanded that I reverse my actions, threatened legal consequences, and accused me of being vindictive and cruel. I listened patiently to her objections while maintaining my position that everything I had done was legally justified and morally appropriate. "Zoya is pregnant, Wilder. You can't abandon a pregnant woman." "Zoya abandoned our marriage to pursue pregnancy with another man. Her current condition is the result of her own choices, not my responsibility. Jules eventually hung up in frustration, but not before promising that Zoya would fight my actions through legal channels. I had anticipated that threat and was fully prepared for whatever challenges might emerge. My phone buzzed with a text message 30 minutes later. This one was from Zoya directly, and the tone was dramatically different from her previous communications. "What have you done? I can't get into the apartment, and the neighbors say there's been construction work going on all week. Jules told me you sold our home without telling me. This is insane, Wilder. Call me immediately so we can sort this out." I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. The time for conversation had passed when she sent her initial text about seeking better biological options. Everything that had happened since then was simply the natural consequence of her decision to abandon our partnership. The weekend would bring additional challenges as Zoya attempted to understand and reverse the new reality I had created. But I was confident in my preparation and documentation. Every action I had taken was legally justified and carefully planned. Her romantic adventure in Paris had ended with the discovery that she no longer had a life to return to in Maine. The poetic justice of that outcome was deeply satisfying. Monday morning brought the legal counterattack I had been expecting. A courier delivered an official letter to my office at 10:15, marked with the letterhead of Morrison, Keller and Associates, a family law firm that specialized in divorce and custody cases. The envelope was thick, suggesting comprehensive documentation, and the delivery method indicated urgency. I opened the letter in my laboratory office, away from curious colleagues who might ask questions about my personal affairs. The contents were predictably aggressive but legally weak, exactly what I had anticipated from Zoya's panicked response to her changed circumstances. The letter was signed by Margaret Morrison, senior partner, and claimed that I had violated numerous statutes related to marital property rights. According to their legal theory, the apartment sale was invalid because it had been conducted without proper spousal notification. They demanded immediate reversal of the transaction and threatened criminal charges for fraud and theft. The threats were impressive, but ultimately toothless. Zoya's own text message provided irrefutable evidence that she had abandoned the marital residence to pursue a relationship with another man. The power of sale authorization she had signed was legally binding and had been properly executed according to state law. Most importantly, I had documented every step of the process with timestamps and official records. I forwarded the letter to David Brennan, the attorney who had handled the apartment closing. David was experienced in real estate law and had anticipated potential challenges when we first discussed the power of sale option. "This is exactly what we prepared for," David assured me when I called him that afternoon. "Your documentation is comprehensive, and the legal basis for the sale is solid. They're fishing for a settlement, but they don't have grounds for reversal." "What's the next step?" "I'll draft a response letter explaining why their claims are invalid. We'll include copies of your wife's text message and the signed authorization form. That should discourage them from pursuing litigation. And if they don't back down? Then we go to court with overwhelming evidence in our favor. Frankly, I'd welcome the opportunity to present this case to a judge. Your wife's own words condemn her position." David's confidence was reassuring, but I knew that Zoya would not surrender easily. She had probably convinced herself that her actions were justified and that I was being unreasonably vindictive. The cognitive dissonance would drive her to escalate the conflict rather than accept responsibility for the consequences. Tuesday brought additional pressure from an unexpected source. Dr. Richard Hawthorne, my supervisor at Meridian Research, requested a private meeting in his office after our morning team briefing. Richard was a thoughtful man who rarely involved himself in his employees' personal affairs unless they affected workplace performance. "Wilder, I received a disturbing phone call yesterday from someone claiming to be your wife's attorney," Richard began carefully. "She was asking questions about your employment status and suggesting that you might be experiencing psychological difficulties. The revelation was both shocking and strategically predictable. Zoya was attempting to undermine my professional reputation as leverage in our personal conflict. The tactic was desperate but potentially effective if it succeeded in creating doubt about my mental stability. "What specific claims did she make?" I asked. "She suggested that you had engaged in erratic financial behavior and might be suffering from a breakdown related to your marriage. She requested information about your job performance and asked whether the company had noticed any concerning changes in your behavior." "And your response?" "I told her that personnel matters are confidential and that any concerns about employee welfare would be handled through proper channels. But I wanted to discuss this with you directly to understand what's happening." I appreciated Richard's professional approach and his willingness to address the situation directly rather than allowing rumors to circulate through the office. "My wife left our marriage last week to pursue a relationship with her ex-boyfriend," I explained. "I took appropriate legal action to protect my financial interests, and she's now attempting to challenge those actions through various means, including apparently trying to damage my professional reputation." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "I've known you for 3 years, Wilder, and your work performance has been consistently excellent. Your recent behavior has been more focused, if anything, not erratic. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of the contact and to offer support if you need it." "I appreciate that, Richard. This situation is being handled through proper legal channels, and it won't affect my work performance." "Good. And if anyone else contacts the company making similar claims, I'll refer them to our legal department." The conversation ended on a positive note, but it confirmed that Zoya was willing to attack my professional life as part of her strategy. The escalation was concerning but not unexpected. Desperate people often made increasingly poor decisions when their initial tactics failed. Wednesday brought news that the apartment renovation was proceeding ahead of schedule. Patricia called to report that the demolition phase was complete and that the new owners were beginning reconstruction. The timeline meant that even if Zoya somehow succeeded in reversing the sale, she would return to find her carefully designed living space completely destroyed. "They're installing floor-to-ceiling windows along the entire harbor wall," Patricia explained. "The view is going to be spectacular when they finish. It's really going to be something special." The irony was perfect. Zoya had always complained that our apartment's windows were too small and blocked her view of the water. Now the space would feature the panoramic harbor views she had wanted, but she would never be able to enjoy them. Thursday afternoon brought a second letter from Morrison, Keller and Associates, this one even more aggressive than the first. Margaret Morrison had apparently researched my background and was now threatening to file complaints with my professional licensing board, claiming that my actions demonstrated unfitness for scientific work. The threats were becoming increasingly desperate and unfocused. Attacking my professional credentials had no legal relationship to the apartment sale, but it revealed how frustrated Zoya had become with her inability to reverse my actions through conventional means. I forwarded the letter to David Brennan, who responded with barely controlled amusement. "They're grasping at straws now," he told me. "These kinds of threats usually indicate that they know their primary case is weak. I'll include a response to these claims in our formal reply, but they're not worth taking seriously. Should I be concerned about the professional licensing complaint? Not at all. Your actions were legal and well documented. Professional boards don't investigate personal disputes unless there's evidence of actual misconduct related to your work duties." Friday brought the most significant development yet. Jules called my office in the early afternoon with a mixture of anger and desperation in her voice. "Wilder, you need to stop this insanity right now. Zoya is pregnant and homeless because of your vindictive behavior. She's staying in a hotel and running out of money, and her lawyer says the legal process could take months to resolve." The description of Zoya's circumstances was satisfying, but not surprising. She had probably expected to return from Paris and resume her previous life while sorting out the details of her affair at her own pace. The discovery that her domestic security had been completely eliminated must have been psychologically devastating. Zoya made her choice when she abandoned our marriage. I replied. I simply adapted to the new circumstances she created. She didn't abandon anything. She went on a trip to gain perspective on her life and her relationship options. That doesn't give you the right to destroy everything she owns. The revisionist narrative was remarkable. Jules was now characterizing Zoya's affair as a legitimate exploration of relationship options rather than adultery. The mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion suggested that Zoya had been feeding her family carefully edited versions of events. I have documentation of Zoya's exact words regarding her intentions, I reminded Jules. She explicitly stated that she was pursuing pregnancy with another man because he was a better biological option. That constitutes abandonment of our marriage under any reasonable interpretation. People say things they don't mean when they're confused and emotional. You can't base life-changing decisions on a single text message. I can, and I did. Zoya's message was clear and unambiguous. She chose to end our marriage, so I formalized that decision through appropriate legal channels. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Jules alternating between threats and pleas. She promised that Zoya would fight the apartment sale in court, threatened to expose my actions to mutual friends and colleagues, and accused me of being heartless and cruel to a pregnant woman. I listened patiently to her objections while maintaining my position that everything I had done was legally justified and morally appropriate. Zoya's pregnancy was the result of her own choices and her responsibility to manage. She's willing to come back and work things out, Jules finally offered. She realizes that she made mistakes, and she wants to rebuild your marriage. But you have to stop this legal warfare and give her a chance to make things right. The offer was both pathetic and revealing. Zoya was apparently willing to abandon Alain and return to our marriage now that she had discovered the financial consequences of her affair. The calculation was purely mercenary. She wanted to restore her domestic security while maintaining her pregnancy with another man. That's not possible, Jules. Too much has happened to repair this relationship. You're making a terrible mistake, Wilder. Zoya loves you, and she's carrying a child who needs stability and security. Don't let your pride destroy your family. Zoya destroyed our family when she chose to pursue pregnancy with her ex-boyfriend. I'm simply acknowledging the reality she created. Jules hung up in frustration, but not before promising that this conflict was far from over. I had expected her threats and was prepared for whatever escalation might follow. The weekend brought a period of relative calm as I continued establishing my new living arrangements and preparing for the next phase of legal challenges. David Brennan had promised to file our response to Morrison, Keller and Associates by Monday morning, which would formally establish our defense strategy. I spent Saturday reviewing my documentation and ensuring that every detail was properly organized and accessible. The evidence file now included screenshots of all Zoya's messages, copies of legal and financial paperwork, records of my communications with various service providers, and a detailed timeline of events. Sunday evening brought one final message from Zoya herself, this one longer and more emotional than any of her previous communications. Wilder, I know you're angry with me and I understand why. I handled this situation badly, and I said things that hurt you, but we've been together for 4 years, and that has to count for something. I'm pregnant now, and this baby needs both of us to be mature and responsible. I'm willing to come home and work through our problems if you'll give me a chance. Please don't let lawyers and legal documents destroy what we built together. I love you, and I want to save our marriage. The message was carefully crafted to appeal to my emotions while avoiding any acknowledgement of her actual behavior. She characterized her affair as poor communication rather than betrayal, and she was positioning her pregnancy as a shared responsibility rather than the consequence of her individual choices. Most tellingly, she was now claiming to love me and want to save our marriage, despite having explicitly stated just 2 weeks earlier that Alain was a better biological option for reproduction. The contradiction revealed how completely her position had shifted once she discovered the financial consequences of her actions. I read the message twice, then saved it to my documentation file without responding. The time for emotional appeals had passed when she sent her initial text about abandoning our marriage. Everything that had happened since then was simply the logical consequence of her decision. Monday morning would bring David Brennan's formal response to her legal threats, and the real battle would begin. But I was confident in my preparation and documentation. Every action I had taken was legally justified and carefully planned. Zoya had chosen to end our marriage in pursuit of what she believed would be a better life with Alain. Now she was discovering that actions have consequences, and some decisions cannot be reversed through manipulation or emotional appeals. The apartment sale was final, the financial accounts were separated, and the legal documentation was comprehensive. Her romantic adventure in Paris had ended with the discovery that she no longer had a life to return to in Maine. The poetic justice of that outcome continued to provide deep satisfaction. David Brennan's response letter was a masterpiece of legal precision that arrived at Morrison, Keller, and Associates on Tuesday morning. He had crafted a document that systematically demolished every argument Zoya's attorneys had presented, while establishing an overwhelming case for the validity of my actions. The letter included copies of Zoya's original text message, the power of sale authorization with her notarized signature, documentation of the apartment closing, and a detailed timeline proving that every step had been conducted according to proper legal procedures. Most devastatingly, it quoted Zoya's own words about abandoning our marriage to pursue a better biological option for pregnancy. Your client's written confession of marital abandonment eliminates any claim to spousal notification rights, David had written. She explicitly stated her intention to end the marriage and pursue pregnancy with another man. My client's subsequent actions were legally justified responses to her documented abandonment of the marital relationship. The letter concluded with a warning that any further harassment of my employer or attempts to damage my professional reputation would result in counter-litigation for defamation and intentional interference with business relationships. David called me Wednesday afternoon to report that Margaret Morrison had contacted him within hours of receiving the response. She wants to negotiate, David explained. Her tone was much more subdued than in her previous communications. I think they realize their position is weaker than they initially believed. What kind of negotiation? She's suggesting that your wife might be willing to accept the apartment sale in exchange for a financial settlement. Apparently, your wife needs immediate housing assistance and doesn't want to wait for a lengthy court battle. The offer was predictable but strategically revealing. Zoya was now acknowledging that she couldn't reverse the apartment sale, so she was attempting to extract money as compensation for her losses. The calculation was purely mercenary. She wanted me to pay for the consequences of her own actions. What did you tell her? That we would consider any reasonable proposal, but that my client wasn't obligated to provide financial support for someone who had abandoned the marriage. I suggested that she submit a written offer if her client was serious about settlement. And if they do submit an offer? We'll evaluate it based on legal merit, but frankly, I don't see any basis for a settlement payment. Your wife created this situation through her own choices, and you responded appropriately to protect your interests. Thursday brought an unexpected development that shifted the entire dynamic of our conflict. Jennifer Martinez approached me during lunch with information that would prove crucial to understanding Zoya's true circumstances. Wilder, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but I heard something yesterday that might be relevant to your personal situation, Jennifer began carefully. My sister works at Portland General Hospital in the maternity ward, and she mentioned that a woman matching your wife's description came in for pregnancy testing earlier this week. The information was startling, but not entirely surprising. Zoya's claims about being pregnant had seemed premature based on the timeline of her Paris trip, but I hadn't investigated the medical details. What did your sister observe? The woman was very upset and demanding immediate testing. She seemed desperate to confirm pregnancy, but the results were negative. She insisted on multiple tests, but they all came back the same way. The revelation was stunning. Zoya had been claiming pregnancy as leverage in our legal dispute, but she wasn't actually pregnant. Her entire negotiating position was based on a fabrication designed to generate sympathy and financial support. "Are you certain about this information?" "My sister is very reliable, and she specifically mentioned the woman's behavior because it was so unusual. Most people are relieved when pregnancy tests are negative if they're not trying to conceive, but this woman seemed devastated." I thanked Jennifer for the information while carefully maintaining my professional demeanor. Internally, however, I was processing the implications of what she had told me. Zoya's pregnancy claims were false, which meant her entire narrative about needing support for herself and a child was fraudulent. The discovery also explained why her family and attorneys had been so aggressive in their demands for immediate financial assistance. They believed they were advocating for a pregnant woman who needed emergency housing and medical care. In reality, they were being manipulated by someone who was fabricating her circumstances to gain sympathy and leverage. I called David Brennan immediately after lunch to share this development. "This changes everything," David said after I explained Jennifer's information. "If your wife is making false pregnancy claims to gain advantage in legal proceedings, that could constitute fraud. We need to document this carefully. How do we proceed?" "I'll request medical records as part of discovery if they continue pursuing litigation. If she's been making false claims about pregnancy to support her legal position, that's grounds for sanctions and possibly criminal charges. And if they submit a settlement offer based on her supposed pregnancy, we'll respond by demanding proof of her medical condition. If she can't provide legitimate documentation, her entire case collapses." Friday afternoon brought the settlement offer David had predicted. Margaret Morrison submitted a proposal requesting $50,000 in immediate financial support for Zoya's housing and medical expenses related to her pregnancy and displacement. The amount was substantial, but not unreasonable given the value of the apartment we had shared. Under normal circumstances, a divorcing spouse might legitimately claim compensation for their share of marital assets. However, these were not normal circumstances, and Zoya's pregnancy claims were apparently fraudulent. David and I reviewed the settlement proposal during a conference call that evening. "They're betting that you'll pay to avoid a lengthy court battle," David explained. "50,000 is less than the cost of extended litigation, so it might seem like a reasonable compromise. Except that her pregnancy claims are false." "Exactly. And her abandonment of the marriage eliminates any legitimate claim to compensation. This is essentially extortion based on fraudulent medical claims." "How do we respond?" "We demand medical documentation to support her pregnancy claims. If she can't provide legitimate records from a qualified physician, we reject the settlement and threaten to file counterclaims for fraud and extortion." The strategy was aggressive, but appropriate given the circumstances. Zoya had escalated the conflict by making false medical claims to support her legal position. Now she would discover that fraudulent tactics carried serious consequences. Monday morning brought David's response to the settlement offer. His letter was diplomatically worded but contained a devastating demand for medical verification of Zoya's pregnancy claims. "My client is willing to consider reasonable settlement proposals based on legitimate circumstances," David had written. "However, any agreement would require comprehensive medical documentation from qualified healthcare providers confirming the pregnancy claims that form the basis of your client's financial demands." The letter continued by noting that false medical claims in legal proceedings could constitute fraud, and that any settlement agreement would include verification procedures to ensure the accuracy of all representations. Margaret Morrison's response arrived Wednesday afternoon and was notably different in tone from her previous communications. The aggressive demands and threats had been replaced by careful legal language that avoided specific medical claims while attempting to maintain negotiating position. Our client's personal medical information is confidential and not subject to disclosure in settlement negotiations, Morrison had written. However, she remains willing to discuss reasonable compensation for her displacement from the marital residence. The evasive language confirmed what Jennifer's sister had observed at the hospital. Zoya couldn't provide medical documentation of her pregnancy because she wasn't actually pregnant. Her entire legal strategy had been based on fraudulent claims designed to generate sympathy and financial leverage. David called me after reviewing Morrison's response. "They're backing down from the pregnancy claims," he reported. "Notice how they're now talking about displacement from the marital residence rather than medical expenses for a pregnant woman. So they know we've discovered the truth? They suspect it, and they're trying to salvage what they can from their legal position. But without the pregnancy angle, they don't have much leverage. What's our next move? We reject their settlement offer and demand that they cease all harassment related to this matter. If they want to pursue litigation based solely on property rights, they can try, but they'll lose badly in court." Thursday brought the final resolution I had been working toward since receiving Zoya's initial text message 3 weeks earlier. David submitted our formal rejection of the settlement offer, along with a comprehensive legal brief explaining why Zoya had no legitimate claim to compensation or property rights. The brief was devastating in its thoroughness. It quoted Zoya's original text message about abandoning our marriage, documented her extended absence from the marital residence, proved that the apartment sale was conducted according to proper legal procedures, and noted the suspicious evolution of her medical claims during settlement negotiations. "Your client explicitly abandoned the marital relationship to pursue pregnancy with another man," David had written. "She forfeited any claim to marital property rights through her own documented actions. My client's subsequent decisions were legally justified responses to her abandonment." The brief concluded with a warning that any further legal action would result in counterclaims for harassment, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Margaret Morrison's final response arrived Friday morning and consisted of a single paragraph acknowledging that her client would not pursue further legal action related to the apartment sale or property division. The legal battle was over. Zoya had discovered that her abandonment of our marriage carried consequences that couldn't be reversed through manipulation, false medical claims, or legal threats. Her romantic adventure in Paris had cost her everything she had built during our 4 years together. I called David to thank him for his excellent work and to confirm that the matter was completely resolved. "It was one of the most clear-cut cases I've handled," David told me. "Your documentation was comprehensive, and your wife's own words condemned her position. She never had a legitimate legal claim. And the fraudulent pregnancy claims? Those probably saved you money in the long run. If she had been actually pregnant, a judge might have ordered temporary support regardless of the abandonment issue. Her false claims eliminated any sympathy she might have generated." The irony was perfect. Zoya's attempt to manipulate the legal system through fraudulent medical claims had ultimately strengthened my position and ensured her complete defeat. I spent the weekend reviewing the entire sequence of events and marveling at how completely Zoya had underestimated the consequences of her actions. She had apparently believed that she could abandon our marriage, pursue pregnancy with another man, and then return to claim financial support and property rights whenever it became convenient. Instead, she had discovered that some decisions cannot be reversed and that actions have permanent consequences. Her text message about seeking a better biological option had provided the legal justification for everything that followed. The apartment was gone, converted into a luxury hotel suite that she would never see. The financial accounts were permanently separated. The legal documentation was comprehensive and irreversible. Most satisfying of all, her false pregnancy claims had been exposed and her credibility destroyed. Any future legal actions would be viewed skeptically by courts and attorneys who now understood her willingness to fabricate circumstances for personal advantage. Zoya had chosen to end our marriage in pursuit of what she believed would be a better life with Alain. Now she was discovering that her romantic adventure had cost her everything she had previously taken for granted. The poetic justice of that outcome provided deep and lasting satisfaction. The complete legal victory was satisfying, but I realized that Zoya's defeat in court was only the beginning of her consequences. She had built her life around social connections, professional relationships, and community standing that were all vulnerable to the truth about her actions. Her carefully curated public image was about to collide with the reality of what she had done. Monday morning brought an opportunity I hadn't anticipated. Dr. Alain Morel contacted my office directly, apparently unaware that I knew about his role in destroying my marriage. His call was professionally polite but strategically naive, revealing that Zoya had not been honest with him about the extent of our legal conflict. "Mr. Sornel, this is Dr. Alain Morel from the Portland Fertility Clinic. I understand that you work in biotech research, and I wanted to discuss a potential collaboration opportunity between our organizations." The audacity was breathtaking. The man who had participated in ending my marriage was now attempting to establish a professional relationship, apparently believing that I was unaware of his personal involvement with my wife. "I'm familiar with your work, Dr. Morel," I replied carefully. "What kind of collaboration did you have in mind?" "We're looking for research partners to help develop new fertility treatments. Your company's expertise in biochemical analysis could be valuable for our clinical trials." "That's interesting. I assume this inquiry is related to your recent work with my wife Zoya?" The silence that followed was profound. Alain was clearly struggling to process the implications of what I had said and how much I might know about his relationship with her. "I'm not sure what you mean," he finally responded, his French accent becoming more pronounced under stress. "I mean, your romantic relationship with my wife and your role in her decision to abandon our marriage. She sent me a very detailed text message about seeking better biological options for pregnancy." Another long silence then. "Mr. Sornel, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of my relationship with Zoya." "No misunderstanding at all, Dr. Morel. I have comprehensive documentation of her communications and activities. I also know that her pregnancy claims were fraudulent, which raises interesting questions about your professional judgment." The conversation ended abruptly, with Alain claiming he needed to review his schedule and would call back later. He never did, but the exchange provided valuable intelligence about the dynamics between him and Zoya. Clearly, she had not been honest with him about the extent of our legal battle or the exposure of her false pregnancy claims. He was probably beginning to realize that his romantic adventure had professional implications he hadn't anticipated. Tuesday brought an opportunity to begin the social phase of Zoya's consequences. Portland's art community was small and interconnected, with gallery owners, artists, and collectors forming a tight network of professional and personal relationships. Zoya's reputation within that community was crucial to her career success and social standing. I had maintained cordial relationships with several people in Portland's art scene through my marriage to Zoya. These connections now provided access to the social circles where her professional reputation could be most effectively damaged. Marcus Webb owned a competing gallery downtown and had always been professionally jealous of Zoya's success with contemporary artists. He was hosting a reception Thursday evening for a new exhibition, and I decided to attend as a recently separated man seeking social connections. The reception was well attended by Portland's cultural elite, including several people who knew both Zoya and me from previous social events. My appearance without her generated immediate curiosity and provided opportunities to share carefully edited versions of recent events. "Wilder, good to see you," Marcus greeted me near the wine table. "Where's Zoya tonight? I thought she'd be interested in seeing Jennifer's latest work." "Zoya is pursuing other interests these days," I replied diplomatically. "She recently traveled to Paris with an ex-boyfriend to explore new relationship options." Marcus raised an eyebrow with obvious interest. The art community thrived on gossip, and any scandal involving a prominent gallery owner was valuable social currency. Really? That's unexpected. I thought you two were solid. So did I, until she sent me a text message explaining that her ex-boyfriend was a better biological option for starting a family. Apparently, our marriage was just a temporary arrangement until someone more suitable became available. The revelation had the intended effect. Marcus's expression shifted from casual interest to shocked fascination as he processed the implications of what I had shared. She actually said that in a text message? Word for word. Better biological option was her exact phrase. Very clinical for someone ending a 4-year marriage. Marcus immediately began calculating how this information could benefit his own professional interests. Zoya's galleries competed directly with his for artists and collectors, and any damage to her reputation would potentially redirect business his way. "That's incredibly callous," he said with practiced sympathy. I had no idea she was capable of that kind of behavior. Neither did I. It's been quite educational discovering who she really is underneath the professional facade. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Marcus probing for additional details about Zoya's actions and current circumstances. I provided carefully selected information that painted her as manipulative and unreliable while maintaining my own dignity and credibility. By the end of the evening, I had shared similar conversations with 6 different people, each of whom represented a node in Portland's interconnected cultural network. The information would spread rapidly through social media, professional gossip, and casual conversations, creating a comprehensive reputation crisis for Zoya. Wednesday brought evidence that the social campaign was having its intended effect. Jennifer Martinez mentioned during our lunch break that her sister had heard rumors about Zoya's situation through mutual acquaintances. People are saying that she abandoned her husband for another man and then tried to claim she was pregnant to get money in the divorce, Jennifer reported. Is any of that true? The basic facts are accurate, I confirmed. She sent me a text message saying she was leaving our marriage to pursue pregnancy with her ex-boyfriend, then tried to use false pregnancy claims to gain advantage in legal proceedings. That's terrible. I always thought she seemed a little self-centered when I met her at company events, but I never imagined she was capable of something like that. The conversation confirmed that Zoya's reputation was being systematically destroyed through social networks that extended far beyond the art community. Her actions were being discussed and condemned by people who had never met her personally, but who were forming negative opinions based on the information spreading through Portland's social ecosystem. Thursday brought a direct confrontation that provided additional opportunities to document Zoya's character for public consumption. She appeared at my office building during lunch hour, apparently hoping to ambush me into a private conversation where she could attempt emotional manipulation without witnesses. Security called my extension to report that someone was requesting to see me in the lobby. I went downstairs to find Zoya waiting near the elevators, looking haggard and desperate in a way that suggested her circumstances had deteriorated significantly since our legal battle ended. "Wilder, we need to talk," she said immediately. "This situation has gotten completely out of control, and we need to find a way to resolve it like adults." "I believe our attorneys have already resolved everything through proper legal channels," I replied, maintaining professional distance. "I'm not talking about legal issues. I'm talking about the rumors and gossip you've been spreading about me throughout the city. People are saying terrible things, and it's destroying my professional reputation." The accusation was revealing. Zoya had apparently discovered that her social standing was collapsing and had correctly identified me as the source of her problems. However, she seemed to believe that she could negotiate her way out of the consequences through direct confrontation. I've simply shared the truth about what happened between us with people who asked direct questions. Your own text message provides the most damaging information. You're taking that message out of context and using it to humiliate me publicly. That's not fair, and it's not helping either of us move forward. The context was perfectly clear, Zoya. You explicitly stated that you were abandoning our marriage to pursue pregnancy with another man because he was a better biological option. There's no ambiguous interpretation of those words. Several people in the lobby were now listening to our conversation with obvious interest. Zoya realized that her attempt at private negotiation was becoming a public spectacle that would generate additional gossip. "Can we please discuss this somewhere more private?" she asked, lowering her voice. "No. We have nothing to discuss privately. You made your choice when you sent that text message, and I've adapted to the circumstances you created. I made a mistake, Wilder. I was confused and emotional, and I said things I didn't mean. But we can work through this if you'll give me a chance to make things right." You weren't confused when you spent 2 weeks in Paris with Alain. You weren't confused when you tried to use false pregnancy claims to extort money from me. You were calculating and deliberate in everything you did. The mention of her false pregnancy claims caused visible distress. Zoya had probably hoped that particular detail would remain confidential, but now it was being discussed in front of witnesses who would inevitably share the information with others. "That's not what happened," she protested weakly. "Medical records don't lie, Zoya. Neither do your own text messages documenting your romantic adventure in Paris." The conversation ended when Zoya realized that she was only making her situation worse by providing additional material for public consumption. She left the building without achieving any of her objectives, while I returned to my office knowing that the lobby confrontation would be discussed throughout the building within hours. Friday brought the culmination of the social destruction campaign. Portland's weekly arts newspaper published a gossip column that included a brief mention of Zoya's situation, carefully worded to avoid libel while conveying the essential facts about her abandonment of our marriage. Local gallery owner Zoya Sornel is reportedly dealing with personal upheaval following the end of her marriage to biotech researcher Wilder Sornel. Sources close to the situation suggest that relationship complications arose when Mrs. Sornel pursued romantic opportunities with a former partner while maintaining her existing marriage commitments. The item was brief but devastating within Portland's small cultural community. Everyone who mattered in the art world would read the column and understand the implications. Zoya's professional relationships would be permanently damaged by the public acknowledgement of her personal conduct. More importantly, the newspaper item provided permanent documentation of her reputation crisis. Future business partners, romantic interests, and social connections would be able to research her background and discover the circumstances that led to the destruction of her marriage and professional standing. The weekend brought a period of reflection on how completely Zoya's circumstances had been transformed over the past month. She had begun with a successful gallery, a stable marriage, and respected social standing within Portland's cultural community. Now she was homeless, financially dependent on family support, legally defeated, and socially ostracized. Her false pregnancy claims had destroyed her credibility, while her own text messages provided irrefutable evidence of her character flaws. Most satisfying of all, her relationship with Alain had apparently deteriorated under the pressure of public exposure and professional consequences. He was facing questions about his judgment in pursuing a married patient, while she was discovering that romantic adventures based on deception rarely provided lasting satisfaction. The social destruction campaign had been more effective than I had initially anticipated. Zoya's reputation within Portland's interconnected cultural community was permanently damaged, creating professional consequences that would follow her for years, regardless of where she relocated or how she attempted to rebuild her career. Sunday evening brought a final message from Jules, who had apparently been designated as the family spokesperson for one last attempt at negotiation. "Wilder, this has gone far enough. Zoya's life has been completely destroyed, and she's talking about leaving Portland permanently because she can't rebuild her reputation here. Whatever she did wrong, she doesn't deserve this level of punishment." The message was revealing in several ways. First, It confirmed that Zoya's social and professional standing had been completely eliminated, forcing her to consider relocating to escape the consequences of her actions. Second, it suggested that her family was beginning to understand the extent of her deception and manipulation. Zoya created these circumstances through her own choices, I replied. I've simply ensured that the truth about her character is widely understood. You've destroyed her entire life over a text message sent during an emotional moment. That's not justice. It's revenge. Justice and revenge aren't mutually exclusive, Jules. Zoya chose to abandon our marriage in the most humiliating way possible, then attempted to manipulate the legal system through fraudulent claims. The consequences she's experiencing are proportional to her actions. She's learned her lesson, Wilder. Isn't that enough? The lesson isn't complete until she fully understands that actions have permanent consequences. Some decisions cannot be reversed through apologies or emotional appeals. The conversation ended with Jules promising that this was the final contact I would receive from Zoya's family. I had achieved everything I set out to accomplish when I first received that devastating text message 5 weeks earlier. Zoya's romantic adventure in Paris had cost her everything she had previously taken for granted. Her marriage, her home, her financial security, her professional reputation, and her social standing had all been systematically eliminated through the logical consequences of her own documented actions. The poetic justice of that outcome provided deep and lasting satisfaction that would endure long after she relocated to rebuild her life elsewhere. Winter was approaching Portland with the kind of gray persistence that made everyone question their life choices. I had been monitoring Zoya's situation from a distance for 2 months, watching as she struggled to rebuild some semblance of stability from the wreckage of her previous life. Her attempts were pathetic but predictable, following the patterns of someone who had never experienced real consequences for destructive behavior. She had moved in with Jules temporarily, sleeping on a couch in a cramped apartment while attempting to maintain her gallery business from a position of complete financial dependence. The arrangement was clearly straining their relationship, as evidenced by the increasingly desperate social media posts from both women seeking new opportunities and fresh starts. More interesting was the complete collapse of her relationship with Alain. The romantic adventure that had seemed so appealing during their Parisian escape had withered under the pressure of public exposure and professional consequences. He was now facing a medical board investigation triggered by anonymous complaints about his involvement with a married patient, while she was discovering that men who pursue married women rarely prove reliable when circumstances become difficult. The irony was exquisite. Zoya had abandoned a stable marriage for what she believed would be a superior relationship with better reproductive prospects. Instead, she had lost everything while gaining nothing except a reputation for deception and manipulation that would follow her indefinitely. But I wasn't finished yet. Monday morning brought an opportunity I had been waiting for since the legal battle ended. The Portland Arts Council was hosting their annual funding review meeting, where local galleries competed for grants and promotional support that could determine their survival for the following year. Zoya's gallery had received council support for the past 3 years, making it crucial to her ability to continue operating. I had maintained a membership in the Arts Council since my marriage to Zoya, contributing regularly to their programming and attending their social events. My standing as a respected professional and recent victim of a public scandal gave me significant credibility within the organization. The funding review meeting was attended by 12 council members, including several people who had heard various versions of Zoya's story through Portland's interconnected social networks. My presence at the meeting was notable but not unusual, since members were encouraged to participate in funding decisions. Before we review individual applications, I'd like to address a situation that affects the Council's reputation and the integrity of our funding process, I announced during the open comment period. One of this year's applicants has been involved in a public scandal that raises questions about their character and professional judgment. The room became noticeably quieter as council members realized I was referring to Zoya's situation. Several people shifted uncomfortably, while others leaned forward with obvious interest in what I might reveal. Zoya Sornel's gallery is requesting continued funding support despite her recent involvement in fraudulent legal claims and abandonment of professional commitments. The Arts Council should consider whether supporting someone with documented credibility problems serves our community's best interests. Council President Margaret Foster attempted to maintain procedural neutrality while clearly struggling with the implications of my statement. Mr. Sornel, while we appreciate member input, we typically focus on artistic merit rather than personal circumstances when making funding decisions. This isn't about personal circumstances, I replied. It's about professional integrity and community standards. Ms. Sornel attempted to defraud legal proceedings through false medical claims and has demonstrated a pattern of deceptive behavior that reflects poorly on organizations that support her work. The discussion that followed was carefully diplomatic, but ultimately devastating to Zoya's funding prospects. Council members who had been prepared to support her application began questioning whether association with her current reputation would damage the Arts Council's credibility with other donors and community partners. By the meeting's end, Zoya's funding application had been tabled pending further review of all relevant factors. In practical terms, this meant her financial support had been eliminated without the council having to explicitly acknowledge that they were punishing her for personal conduct. Tuesday brought news that Zoya's gallery was facing additional financial pressure from other sources. Marcus Webb called to inform me that several artists were withdrawing their work from her exhibitions, citing concerns about her professional stability and reputation within the collector community. Word has gotten around that she's unreliable and manipulative, Marcus explained, with barely concealed satisfaction. Artists don't want to be associated with someone who might damage their own reputations through unpredictable behavior. That seems like a reasonable business decision on their part. It's destroying her ability to mount quality exhibitions. Without respected artists, she can't attract serious collectors, and without collector interest, she can't generate revenue to keep the gallery operating. The domino effect was exactly what I had hoped to achieve through the social destruction campaign. Zoya's professional network was systematically abandoning her as the truth about her character spread through Portland's cultural community. Wednesday brought a direct confrontation that provided additional opportunities to document her deteriorating circumstances for future reference. Zoya appeared at my apartment building during evening hours, apparently hoping to catch me off guard in a residential setting where she might have more emotional leverage. Building security called to report that someone was requesting access to see me. I went down to the lobby to find Zoya waiting with the desperate appearance of someone whose life was spiraling completely out of control. "Wilder, please, we need to end this," she began immediately. "I know you're angry with me, and I know I made terrible mistakes, but this has to stop before it destroys both of us." "I'm doing quite well, actually. My career is advancing, my financial situation is stable, and my personal life is free from deception and manipulation." "You know what I mean. This campaign you're running against me professionally and socially, it's gone beyond anything I deserved even if I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I repeated. "You didn't make mistakes, Zoya. You made calculated decisions to abandon our marriage, pursue pregnancy with another man, and then attempt to defraud legal proceedings through false medical claims. Those weren't errors in judgment. They were deliberate choices that revealed your true character." I was confused and emotional when I sent that text message. I didn't mean everything I said, and I certainly didn't intend to hurt you the way this situation has developed. You meant every word of that message, and you were perfectly clear about your intentions. The only thing you didn't anticipate was facing consequences for your actions. Several other building residents were now observing our conversation with obvious interest. Zoya realized that her attempt at private reconciliation was becoming another public spectacle that would generate additional gossip about her circumstances. Can we please go somewhere private to discuss this? I have a proposal that might benefit both of us. No, we have nothing to discuss privately, and I'm not interested in any proposals from someone with your demonstrated relationship to truth and commitment. I'm offering to leave Portland permanently if you'll stop actively working to destroy my reputation. I'll relocate somewhere else and rebuild my life without any contact or interference with yours. The offer was revealing in multiple ways. First, it confirmed that Zoya understood I was actively orchestrating her social and professional destruction rather than simply responding to circumstances. Second, it suggested that she had concluded her situation in Portland was irreparable and that relocation was her only option for escape. Your reputation is based on your own documented actions, not my commentary. Relocating won't change what you did or who you are. It would give me a chance to start over somewhere that people don't know about our personal situation. Until they research your background and discover why you left Portland, professional communities are smaller than you think, and people talk to each other. The conversation ended when Zoya realized that I wasn't interested in negotiating any kind of settlement or truce. She left the building without achieving any of her objectives, while I returned to my apartment knowing that our final confrontation had been witnessed by multiple people who would inevitably share the details with others. Thursday brought the culmination of everything I had been working toward since receiving her devastating text message 4 months earlier. Zoya's gallery announced that it was closing permanently due to changing market conditions and new opportunities for the owner. The euphemistic language fooled no one. Everyone in Portland's art community understood that her business had collapsed due to the reputation crisis and loss of artist and collector confidence. The closure represented the complete elimination of her professional identity and primary source of income. Marcus Webb called that afternoon to share additional details about her circumstances. She's been trying to sell her remaining inventory at desperate prices, but even then, she's having trouble finding buyers. Nobody wants to be associated with her situation. What about her personal collection? She's been liquidating everything through online auctions. Apparently, she needs cash immediately and can't wait for proper gallery sales. The image of Zoya frantically selling her carefully curated art collection through impersonal online platforms was deeply satisfying. She had spent years building a reputation as a sophisticated curator with refined aesthetic judgment. Now she was reduced to desperate fire sales that confirmed her complete professional failure. Friday brought a final message from Jules that served as Zoya's formal surrender in our extended conflict. Wilder, Zoya is leaving Portland next week. She's moving to Seattle to stay with friends while she figures out her next steps. She wanted me to tell you that she's sorry for everything that happened and that she hopes you can find peace with how this situation resolved. The message was carefully worded to suggest magnanimous forgiveness on Zoya's part while avoiding any acknowledgement of the systematic destruction I had orchestrated. She was apparently still attempting to maintain some dignity even in complete defeat. I hope she finds the fresh start she's looking for, I replied diplomatically. She also wanted me to ask if you would be willing to provide a neutral reference if potential employers contact you about her background. The audacity of the request was breathtaking. Zoya wanted me to help her rebuild her career by concealing the truth about her character from future employers. She was essentially asking me to participate in deceiving other people about the same qualities that had destroyed our marriage. I would only provide honest assessments based on my direct experience with her professional conduct and personal integrity. Jules understood immediately that my response was a polite refusal to help Zoya escape the consequences of her actions. Any reference I provided would necessarily include information about her deceptive behavior and unreliable character, making it more harmful than helpful to her job prospects. I understand, Jules replied after a long pause. I guess she'll have to rebuild her reputation on her own. That's probably for the best. Fresh starts should be based on genuine change, not concealment of previous behavior. The conversation ended with Jules acknowledging that this would be our final contact regarding Zoya's situation. The extended conflict that had begun with a devastating text message was finally reaching its conclusion. Saturday morning brought news that Zoya had indeed left Portland, apparently departing in the middle of the night to avoid any final confrontations or public acknowledgement of her defeat. Her apartment was abandoned with rent unpaid, leaving Jules responsible for cleaning up the remaining financial obligations. The complete elimination of Zoya's presence from Portland felt like the conclusion of a complex scientific experiment. I had systematically tested the hypothesis that actions have consequences by methodically destroying every aspect of her life that had enabled her betrayal of our marriage. The results were conclusive. Her domestic security, financial independence, professional reputation, social standing, romantic relationship, and community connections had all been permanently eliminated through the logical application of evidence she had provided herself. Sunday evening brought a period of reflection on the comprehensive nature of her destruction and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been achieved through legal and social mechanisms rather than violence or illegal activity. Zoya had chosen to end our marriage in pursuit of what she believed would be a superior life with better reproductive and financial prospects. Instead, she had lost everything she had previously taken for granted while gaining nothing except a reputation for deception and manipulation that would follow her indefinitely. The apartment we had shared was now a luxury hotel suite that she would never see. The financial accounts we had built together were permanently separated and legally protected. The professional network she had cultivated was systematically turned against her through her own documented behavior. Most satisfying of all, her false pregnancy claims had been exposed and her credibility destroyed, ensuring that future attempts at manipulation would be viewed skeptically by anyone who researched her background. The poetic justice of her complete defeat provided deep and lasting satisfaction. Some decisions cannot be reversed through apologies, emotional appeals, or geographic relocation. Some actions have permanent consequences that endure regardless of subsequent regret or attempted reconciliation. Zoya had learned that lesson through the systematic destruction of everything she had valued about her previous life. The education had been expensive for her and profitable for me, both financially and emotionally. As winter settled over Portland with its characteristic gray determination, I reflected on how completely my circumstances had improved since receiving her devastating text message. My career was advancing, my financial situation was stable, and my personal life was free from the deception and manipulation that had characterized our marriage. The future stretched ahead with unlimited possibilities, unencumbered by someone whose character had proven fundamentally incompatible with trust, commitment, and basic human decency. The text message that had initially seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of my liberation from a relationship that was built on false foundations and sustained through my own willingness to overlook warning signs about Zoya's true nature. Now, I was free to build a life based on authentic relationships with people who understood that actions have consequences and that some betrayals cannot be forgiven or forgotten. The satisfaction of that realization would endure long after Zoya had relocated to Seattle and attempted to rebuild her reputation among people who didn't yet know the truth about her character. But truth has a way of emerging regardless of geographic distance or attempted reinvention. Her documented behavior would follow her indefinitely, serving as a permanent reminder that some choices create consequences that cannot be escaped through relocation or time. The final victory was complete and irreversible, achieved through patience, planning, and the systematic application of evidence that Zoya had provided herself through her own documented actions and words.